This is Todd South of Military Times. We're down here at the Joint Readiness Training Center at Fort Johnson, Louisiana. It's one of the premier combat training centers that the Army has for doing brigade-sized rotations of actual live troops. They can do up to division-level stuff with simulations and even bring in core assets. So really big stuff can happen at these places. On the ground, you see multiple battalions moving around doing different stuff. Now that's been in existence for decades, but recently, under the current Army Chief of Staff, they've been trying to do a new quote-unquote transformation in contact. So in the past, what they would do is you would have a unit, say, deploying to Iraq or Afghanistan. They would work up for a number of months, get a new equipment, new personnel, test those things out, really work a battle plan at their home station, and then come to a major field training exercise here at some place like JRTC or at the National Training Center out in Fort Irwin, California. Now, those were pretty much locked in place. They were only going to be doing what they had been trained to do in their doctrine, very rigid from like their schooling and what the Army had been doing for decades and which was successful. Those kinds of tactics, same kind of reliable equipment, you're going to combat, that's what's happening. In order to change anything, whether it was equipment or tactics or procedures, that would take mountains of paperwork, bureaucracies back in DC or the Pentagon and different agencies all over the Army, which are quite important and do provide a lot of input and research and things for those types of changes. But instead, the new chief, General Randy George, is really pushing them to transform, make these adjustments kind of on the fly, like as they're preparing. So the 2nd Brigade of the 101st Airborne Division out of Fort Campbell began with a kind of a practice rotation down here back in January to troubleshoot and kick the tires on what they needed, what they didn't need, going against a very skilled opposition force down here, kind of playing the bad guy. They got to do that rotation in January to kind of like get some lessons out of it. And very rapidly, in about 6 months or so, they made a bunch of adjustments to their plan, to their structure, to their communications equipment, to their training. I'm adding a lot of drone training for their soldiers to get them in the field and using those drones and using them offensively and defensively, checking out new sensors, trying new methods of decoy, and built all that up. I've come down here now in August to be out in the field for a number of weeks. Most of that time recently that we've been here has been called quote unquote in the box, which means they're basically being pressured on a long-term 72, 96-hour mission, constant nonstop, 24 hours a day, sleeping in the field when they can sleep, and running those missions against the opposition force. Now the opposition force down here, they call them Geronimo. They're basically very seasoned, well-trained soldiers of all ranks and levels, running pretty much a battalion or more, sometimes up to a brigade with simulation size, maybe 750 personnel actually live, with additional simulations for effects on different types of units, support, artillery, tanks, their own drones. Those guys here live here year-round, do 2 and 3 year tours or longer here. They do them all the time. They're very well seasoned. They know the terrain, they know the equipment, and then they take that knowledge and they apply it against the force like the 101st. They're using tactics like the Russians are using in Ukraine, like the Chinese might use out in the Indo-Pacific, and they're testing that unit, testing the 2nd Brigade of the 101st. Now the 2nd Brigade of the 101st has taken a new kind of construct called a mobile brigade combat team, where they're lightening up the load, they're shrinking headquarters. I mean, headquarters are shrinking down from, maybe a few years ago, 60 people having to run an entire brigade in a headquarters down to 20-something last year. They're saying they can do it with 8 personnel now. Now with that technology, those drones are able to move faster, react quicker, identify things more easily, and get their job done and get to the objective or defend a position if they have to. This is part of a larger effort of the Army, not just transforming contact globally, but with certain brigades, one also out of Hawaii, one out of Fort Drum up in New York, the 10th Mountain Division. They're experimenting with their own kind of configurations of these brigade combat teams, trying to see how they might employ them in a future combat, be it in the Pacific, be it in Europe, be it anywhere, CENTCOM. And they're using those types of testings, experimentations to figure out what's the Army going to need to fight, where it needs to fight against the next adversary tonight, today, not 5 or 10 years from now. So that's what we've been seeing here at the JRTC, where we've got a lot of interesting technology and talked to a lot of interesting soldiers and leaders about how they're doing this change and what it means for the Army. This is Todd South of Military Times.